Well, welcome. I'm so happy to see some smiling faces on this cold morning. I was so worried it was just going to be the two of us. So, welcome. I'm so happy you all are here. Diane, it's a brief little introduction about Diane. She is a retired public health professional who has remained engaged in public policy. She has been active in the League of Women Voters and the Democratic Party, and over the last decade has been expanding her focus to include voting and the prevention of voter suppression. She has become alarmed at the current political climate and will share with us the findings of her research on what we can do to preserve democracy. Welcome, Diane.
Well, as Dottie said, thank you for coming. I just thought it would be Dottie and me. So I'm impressed with this group that you're willing to get out in the morning. And I will forget to hold the microphone to my mouth. So just sort of do something to remind me to do that because this feels very awkward. But anyway, so oh, let's see. Now I'm going to go like that in a very dramatic move. That means next slide, please. So how is everybody besides cold? So, so are you angry? Are you like freaked out? Are you like are you thank you. See, that's I knew that would are you overwhelmed? Are you confused? Are you feeling like they're flooding the zone? Are you depressed sometimes? All those things. I'm all those things. Sometimes I feel like I'm all those things at the same time. And so then are you thinking, what can I do? What should I do? What? I mean, I'm an American. This is America. There must be something I can do, but I don't know what it is. And so then, oh, he's got to pay attention. You young people. Okay, here we are trying to save the world for you. Okay, so we maybe I are going, going to the protests, and maybe you're going to the protests too, and you like it. People are yelling and cheering, and there's music, and there's a bunch of people our age. As I look around, it's a bunch of people our age, and there's funny signs, and so it's good for your mental health. It's cathartic. So, but I was like, so this is good. I like it. But is this helpful? Is this a good way to spend my time? Should I be doing this? Should I be doing something else? Should I be doing something in addition? So I was trying to answer. Oh, good. He's paying attention now. So because I was trying to figure that out, and so I thought, well, I think I'll do some research because I like to research stuff. And so then, have you heard of the 3.5% rule? So I thought, well, I'll start with that because I've heard that, and that seemed to be a good starting point. And so I looked at the research, and it turns out there's this whole field of study on this sort of stuff. So it was really interesting. And so the 3.5% rule is a result of research that was published in about 2010. And it was, my nose runs when I'm cold. So I have my little hanky here. So it was a research paper that was done by two women, and then they were looking at the effectiveness, they were comparing the effectiveness of violent versus peaceful protests in its ability to overthrow an authoritarian government. And so what they found was that peaceful attempts to overthrow an authoritarian government were twice as effective as violent protests. And then they drilled down into the data of the peaceful protests and found that peaceful movements, and they all had protests as part of them. And they drilled down and they said, oh, they found that any peaceful protest that was able to engage 3.5% of the total population in a sustained protest movement, 9 to 12 months, all of those were successful. So then that became the 3.5% rule, and you'll see that all over the place. But they didn't mention there were other tactics that were used in addition to the protests, and we're going to talk about those in a minute. So if you'll think about that, well, that's really good and that's interesting, and we are really worried about ending up in an autocratic society or government, but we're not there yet. So it turns out that we're in something called competitive authoritarianism. And if you look at the characteristics of that status, that you'll see that's where we are. So we have elections. We're hopeful. things aren't going so well in Georgia, so we need to keep an eye on it. But at the moment, we're thinking we certainly had some very successful elections in 2025. So we're hopeful that we'll have free and fair elections. So that's, kind of the hope there. But dissent is risky. Yes, we see that people getting their losing their jobs and so on. The playing field is tilted against the opposition. We're the opposition, by the way, in this scenario, and erosion of the rule of law. And of course, that's making us really nervous. And they're not like going out, but they're definitely we're seeing an erosion of it. So that really does describe us. Um, so if you look at societies that are in this condition, that just say, okay, well, let's get everybody registered to vote. Let's get everybody out to vote. Let's vote because we can. There's more of us than there are of them. We'll vote and we'll win. 7.5% of those societies were able to preserve democracy. But if you looked at elections and you add civil resistance, over half of those societies were able to protect their democratic government. So, they're not great odds, but they're in our favor. So, okay, so now what? What does that mean? Well, it means that we need to have protests. We talked about that briefly already. But again, we need to use other strategic non cooperation, and that's boycotts, strikes, call out slowdowns. The thing that's different about this newer research data is they talk about pillars of support. They talk about a sort of attacking the pillars of support. And so, what does that mean? So, all governments, authoritarian governments, democratic governments, they all need elements of the society that support them, regardless of whether it's democracy or autocracy. And so you can see it organized different ways, but this one is just organized: military, schools, government, business, religion. So you can see those are pillars of society. So there's things that make society work. So the strategy is to shift these key pillars away from autocracy and to support democracy. And so then of course, pillars are people, like thousands of people. So I mean, they're lumped together. But so then the first thing is you're thinking, well, we need to get these people to maybe not be so supportive. And then you want to get them to sort of maybe do things slower or ignore directives. And then eventually you want all of those people, the people that are in those pillars, to basically openly or at least oppose the regime. So there's sort of a transition period. Okay, so let's just talk briefly about protests. So we're talking about large, sustained protests. And if you look at 3.5%, which I don't think we have to follow that rule exactly, but the No Kings 2 was 7 million, and we think 3.5%, last time I looked at it, was about 12 million. So we were pretty close. And you can't see because it's a small picture, but there was at least one protest in every single state. So that was really good. And, people were going crazy. And now I think the next one is, supposed to be at the end of March. And I think we're going to have more people because everything's getting worse. So people are starting to get a little bit, a lot of people are getting more and more nervous. I think we'll see more people. It has to be diverse. And I just emphasize that because if you look at the protests, a lot of them look like us. We're the people that protested for Vietnam and for civil rights, and we need to expand the diversity. We need to, the protests need to look like the country that we're trying to protect. So we need to get young people and, diverse ethnicities and all that stuff. And then they have to be peaceful because we don't want, for a lot of reasons, we don't want to have guns. We don't want to have people throwing rocks. We don't want to have broken glass on the street. So they have to be peaceful. And I know when we see what's happening in Minneapolis, it's hard to think about that, but we have to stay peaceful. Otherwise, we're going to lose, I think. So just here's a couple of examples of, peaceful demonstrations. And we're lucky so far, at least the ones I've been to in Gainesville and High Springs, that they've been very peaceful. And hopefully they'll stay that way. Maybe we're not as challenged, but we need to just keep that in mind. Okay. So let's look at some of the pillars and let's look at some of the things that people have done to be strategically non-cooperative. And so religion, because I'm so glad to be here because religion was my first example. So Pope Leo, the first bishop that he appointed was Michael Pham. And Michael is a refugee from Vietnam, came here when he was young, entered the priesthood, and now he is the bishop of San Diego. And of course, he's very sensitive to the issues. And so the first thing he did was to gather up his parish priests and a bunch of other faith leaders, and they formed a protective guardianship for the people that were going in for their immigration visits. So you know how the people that are applying for refugee status have to go in for their appointments, and then ICE stands in the hallway and arrests them. So then every family that went in had a chaperone, so to speak, that was a religious person. And so ICE was all there. They said, and when the people started coming out of their appointments, ICE was all gone. So they were intimidated by the presence because they know these people are in the country legally. They know that, but they just have this quota. So anyway, so that was very exciting. That's an example of how effective they can be. This is a pastor down in St. Pete who's got an ongoing propaganda. Propaganda is probably not the right word, but anyway, you can see that he's very overt in his statements about ICE, and I guess he keeps it up for a while, and then he puts he has the little sign out in front. So he's very consistently pushing back. It's non-cooperative. It's peaceful. It's a freedom of speech, so he's allowed to do this. But it's just not only keeps him and ICE ongoing, but it shows his support to the community for his position. Let's talk about the arts. And arts didn't show up on that screen, but certainly the arts is an important pillar of creativity and energy. And so the picture on the left is a portrait. There's Amy Sherald, is an up-and-coming artist. She does these magnificent portraits. And this was one of the more recent ones that she did, Transforming Liberty. And she was pretty excited because she was invited to go to the Smithsonian and do a one-woman show of these magnificent portraits. And then Trump gave the mandate to basically whitewash our history at the Smithsonian Museum. They were taking down anything that involved people of color, anything that referred to LGBTQ. They were whitewashing. I'm just calling that whitewashing. All the Smithsonian exhibits were being changed. So she felt like that, because this is a trans woman who is posed kind of like the Statue of Liberty, Transforming Liberty. She felt that would be offensive and they wouldn't let her show it. So she canceled. She said, I'm not going. If I can't be my full artistic self, I'm not going. And I think that was incredibly heroic, because that would have been really a huge thing for her career. So hats off to Amy. And of course, probably that Kennedy, that Trump has taken over the Kennedy Center. He's taken over the directors, and he put his name on there. And so we're seeing, usually it's like a very upscale group of, really highly respected performers that go there, and they're just every day you see somebody's canceling. And so that's non-cooperation. Those are examples of strategic non-cooperation by people in the arts. The media are critical. We have to know what's going on. How do we know where we are? How do we know how bad things are? Because we're reading about it in the press, we're seeing it on the news. And so we need to be sure that the media that we refer to is telling the truth. We all have our sources of media, but I think it's important to realize that things are changing. People are buying out, and there's mergers, and they're all so like a source of information that you have been depending on may or may not continue to be a good source of information because of the various financial things that are going on. So we need, and of course, just personally, my giving, which certainly is very limited, but I've really focused on media to try to make sure that we know what's going on, and that, because we have to know the truth. And we sort of think about media people as like, dressed up, and they have their suits and their ties and their makeup on, and they're interviewing people on the rotunda, and they're sitting around the table discussing things, maybe talking to their secret sources. But media has a rougher side. So on the right side of that slide is John Abernathy, who's an independent photojournalist, and he was in Minneapolis. I get emotional about these things, I'm sorry. He was in Minneapolis taking pictures of what was happening on the street. And the federal agents grabbed him, threw him to the ground, They put some sort of gas thing in front of, by his face, so he was having trouble seeing. His eyes were watering. So now he's looking up. He's not looking for help for himself. He's being beaten and brutalized and terrorized with this mysterious, mist. He's looking for somebody to take his pictures. He was guarding the truth. So he finally saw somebody that he thought looked familiar. So he called out, he told him who he was. I'm John Abernathy. I'm an independent journalist. Please get my pictures and save them for me. So you see, he threw the camera. The guy grabbed the camera, ran away. And so then they took him off and beat him up and, finally let him go. He found the guy and he was able to get his pictures. And he felt like it was worth it because the pictures were so brutal that he was happy. And so we admire people like John who are putting their life on the line so that we know what's happening. Just a little water here. Go to the next slide, please. If you look at the movements in other countries, a lot of other countries have a lot more involvement of their workforce in the unions. And so unions can be a very strong part of a peaceful movement. They can do slowdowns, they can do walkouts, they can do strikes. Here we don't have, we still have millions of people in unions, but they're not as strong. But there still is a significant role because they do operate as a block. They go together. They're used to sort of doing things together. So you don't have to get in touch with a million people. You can talk to the leaders. So they did a study and they decided that the current administration was not in favor of working people, that their policies were anti-working people. So they put out a paper and they did a bus tour and they went around the country trying to, get the various union members involved in, again, pushing back anti-cooperative activity. So for some reason, this administration is like totally anti-science. And I don't know if that's just a coincidence or if it's part of their overall strategy. But certainly we're seeing the CDC, which used to be those of us in healthcare, that was like they set the gold standard. And we just, what do you think? Well, we just go to CDC and look it all up. It was very reliable. Now the vaccine schedules are not dependable. That we have people there that have a bias or not scientific. So the CDC is losing its credibility with people, that are really interested in good science. So you can see the Academy of Pediatrics, they're going to start putting out their own vaccine schedule, and they're going to start coming up with all of the recommendations that we used to rely on CDC for. And American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology, they're of course worried about accurate information related to birth control. And then of course the thing just came out with Tylenol and pregnancy, so we can't depend on CDC or basically anybody in the government to give us good health recommendations. So we're seeing these professional organizations, reaching out. And then ACOG was so mad. Apparently they had disgusted maybe that they had some federal money that they were doing a grant. I'm not sure what they were doing, but they sent it back. They're like, we don't want your money. We don't want to have anything to do with you, which I think is pretty good. People are willing to send money back. Somebody did a lot of grants in my life. It's supposed to be a pro-business administration, so we have to see how is business involving themselves in this. But so Kristi Noem during the big shutdown made a video that said, that was supposed to go into all the airports. It was sent to all the airports saying that Democrats, the reason your flights are canceled and late and there's all these problems is because of the Democrats. They're the ones that shut down the airport. Well, she used federal funds to make that. And so the airports were like, that violates the Hatch Act. We're not going to show that. So a lot of the airports, I don't know, maybe all of them, but eventually, they were all like, no, this isn't right. This is illegal. So they didn't show them. I have to say, if you said NFL, I would probably be able to come up with what that stands for. But, not being a great sports fan, I can't really claim any knowledge, but I guess if I were to think about them, most sports enterprises are politically neutral at the very least. And then you think, well, probably all those, I hate to be, sort of a racist here or whatever it would be, but you sort of would think all those football people would be maybe a little bit right of center. So they said, of course, the Super Bowl is like this big thing, and the halftime is like really the big thing, like it's supposedly in the whole world. It's what's like in the on the planet. It's the biggest entertainment thing in the whole planet. So they said this. I just heard that last night on the radio. So 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 they announced that Bad Bunny was going to be their entertainment, and I was like, none of it meant anything to me. But since that happened, Bad Bunny, maybe last time I did this talk, most people didn't know, but there's a lot more now about Bad Bunny. But he's a Puerto Rican man who sings in Spanish, and he apparently is one of the most popular entertainers in the world, but he doesn't entertain here. Apparently he has spent some time in New York and Los Angeles, but he doesn't really entertain here. So but the MAGA people, I can say this with this group, right? So, well, because I'm with the League of Women Voters, have to be really careful what I say there. So the MAGA people are like, we can't have a brown guy singing in Spanish at the halftime show of the Super Bowl. You got to be kidding me. And Trump is like, oh, I've never heard of him, but it's just too far for me to go. I can't possibly make it. So there was this big pushback with MAGA, can't have a brown guy singing in Spanish. And there was this big pushback. Like, we need white men singing in English. Oh, I forgot. So now, of course, now I know who Bad Bunny is. So I've been watching social media because I have to keep up with all that stuff so I can give these talks. And so this was a little teaser, he called it. And so it was very joyful. So he's like this tall guy, and he like was dancing with everybody. So like one person would come and it was a white woman, and then a second later, then a Hispanic woman would come. And then, so there was just like all these different ethnic, he's really leaning into diversity. So he's got, all these, different colors, different genders, different outfits, obviously different cultures that he was just dancing with, just to show, I guess, his interest in diversity. But he's singing in Spanish. Okay, so I just wanted to mention that because that was like got me all excited. Because I knew who next Sunday, 6:30. So okay, so anyway, so the MAGA people were pushing back, and the NFL and Mr. Bunny said, "We got this. We're doing it. We're doing it our way." So white guys. So we want white guys singing English, right? So then I guess a couple weeks ago, I have to say I don't keep up too close. The NFL said that they were going to have Green Day participate in the entertainment. So that's good. At least you don't know who Green Day is. I didn't know who it is either. But it's three white guys, and they sing in English, and they showed some of their lyrics on the screen, and it was no KKK, no fascist, no MAGA. So they got what they wanted. They wanted white guys singing in English, and then to top it all off, they invited Miss Brandy Carlisle to sing. It looks like some of you know who she is. I guess I'm devoid of cultural expertise here, so probably not. Anyway, so she's activist. She's involved in a lot of fundraising for various issues, humanitarian causes, racial justice, LGBTQ rights, and so we have this whole racial justice halftime show. So who knew? So go NFL. So next week we all have to watch the Super Bowl, at least the no, I have to be nonpartisan when it comes to who's going to win. Okay. Okay, so then probably everybody in here but me knows who Sabrina Carpenter is. I've heard her name, but she's a singer, apparently a very popular singer, and she has a song which I think is named Juno. Okay. Well, anyway, so at least if I'm saying it right, nobody knows. So she has a song called Juno, and so you know how Trump, his people make all these little movie things. So he used her song as a background in one of those videos. So she like hopped right on X and really, gave him the business and threatened to sue him, and was very upset. And they took it down. And of course, he made some snide remark, but they took it down. And now Franklin, you know Franklin? Franklin is a young turtle who who lives in Canada. So you know that he's very polite and a sweet person, nice, polite, low key person. And he is beloved by Canadian and American children. And they make books about him, and he talks about how to be nice to your friends and share your toys and be nice to your siblings no matter how terrible they are to you and obey your parents and all that kind of stuff. So he's like, like an American hero among little kids. So Pete Hegseth took a picture of little Franklin, took his likeness, I guess you say, put him on the edge of a helicopter with a gun, shooting. Those boats, how we're blowing up those boats in the Caribbean. He had Franklin doing that. So see, Franklin, he's mad. He's from Canada, but see the flag's in the back. So he put out a little video talking about how terrible that was, and he had a picture of Pete in there, and he was really pushing back. I mean, he was very uncooperative. He was like non-cooperation personified because he was very mad that his likeness had been misused. Okay, so what about like at the local level? What can we do at the local level? Well, we talk about these big protests and they're really important, but we can have little protests. We can have little targeted protests. So Indivisible was alerting us to this airline called Avilo, and they were a new regional airline, and they decided to take they're trying to get started. They took a contract with ICE to fly people out of the country. So, obviously we don't like that. And so Indivisible was getting people who lived in airports that serviced Avila, was getting them to protest. So see, that's not very many people. So if you have a targeted protest, something local like that is going to make a difference. And then, of course, you remember all the freedom of speech stuff where the guy was saying we can do it the hard way or the easy way. And they took Jimmy Kimmel off the air. And you can see the eloquence of the protest there. That was that was a small protest in Burbank because that's the entry to Walt Disney Studios. So there were small protests there, locally. So, but the point I want to make is that people started canceling their Walt Disney streaming services. So thousands of people canceled their streaming services, and so you know how that turned out. So those were all successful efforts involving the protests were small amounts of people, and then that boycott, and that's what I'm going to talk about just a little bit more in a minute. So, and then just to let you know, not that I want to set up competition among the churches, but I just thought I'd mention that Westminster, so that, when they took down all the rainbows at the crosswalks, Westminster decided to put up their own rainbow in the driveway to their church. So just saying. So we're seeing those. So those are some examples of non-cooperation, strategic non-cooperation, looking at the different pillars. So are we seeing that this is making a difference? Because obviously there is sort of the, power structure that we're trying to influence. So I know that when we see ICE, they really look like they're enjoying their job. But if you look inside, if you look behind the curtain, came out just last week. You can see that morale is not good. I mean, they have long hours. They have high quotas. That's the reason they're so brutal. I'm not saying it's okay. I'm just saying it's not easy. And then, of course, we all hate them. We're blowing whistles and we're pounding on pans so they can't sleep at night. So morale among them is really low. And of course, that sometimes the National Guard and the Marines were deployed in areas where they were really they didn't need to be there. It was just a statement by the administration that we can do this. Well, they weren't happy about it. And so the retired generals, the ones that, in a position to say something, they're reporting that the morale among the troops is low. And authoritarian regimes require the loyalty of their security forces. So it's really good to see that is this good news? That morale is low. I think in this particular situation it is. Okay, and so you remember we had a property developer standing up there telling pregnant women that they shouldn't take Tylenol during pregnancy. So the president stood up there and told people they shouldn't take Tylenol during pregnancy. And I was surprised to see that several of the top ranking healthcare people in the administration, without any reason, actually came out and said, well, no, that's really not exactly what the data say. So Kennedy made an announcement, sort of, he sort of put himself up where, like, I'm going to come up with the cause of, what am I trying to say? Thank you, autism. So he put himself under pressure, and then the only thing he could come up with was like, well, maybe Tylenol had something to do with it. So he didn't really make that strong a statement, but the president then took over and he made the strong statement. So then his people, amazingly enough, tried to clarify that that's really not what the data say. So that was his administration. And Bill Cassidy, who's the reason we have Kennedy as the supervisor, I mean, as the HHS secretary, he at least redeem himself, but he at least had to say something like, well, that's not really what the data say. And John Thune is a businessman, so I have no idea why he decided, but he weighed in and said that really that's not what the data say. So that must have been, maybe his wife is pregnant, I don't know. Okay, so, Trump sometimes uses language that's not appropriate. So was that a nice thing to say? Would you please tell my family how polite I was when I said how diplomatic? I'm not known for my diplomacy. Um, so so Trump described Walz as retarded. And of course, the use of that language isn't really appropriate, but Tim Walz has a special needs child. So it seemed to be too personal to just have been an. And so then there was a senator from Indiana who also had a special needs child. So he was really also angry. There were a lot of comments. I mean, we couldn't do this all day, even though I just love being here with you. But there were a lot of other comments. But anyway, so this guy from Indiana, the senator, he's like, no, this is not what we do. This is not right. So he pushed back, and then of course that the Trump has been trying to get all the Republican legislators to gerrymander, and Indiana said, no, we're not doing it. And I think this guy took the lead in pushing back. And so Indiana refused. They met and they refused to gerrymander their state. So good for them. Okay, so how are things going in the Congress? Well, darling little Marjorie Taylor Greene, who was a great unknown until she hitched her wagon to the star of Trump and became, a very vocal, well-known spokesperson in support of Trump. But then her children apparently were enrolled in the Affordable Care Act insurance programs, and then all of a sudden they got their new fees for what their premium was going to be every month, and she was like, "Whoa, no, this is too expensive. We need to do something about this." So she spoke out, and then the whole thing with the Epstein files, she not only signed the petition to release the files, she was out there very actively engaging the I hate to say victims, but I forget what I'm supposed to call them. But anyway, the women that had been involved. So she was very active and very supportive of that population. And then she started talking about, ICE and how unacceptable that was. So she was really engaged in really, a pretty antagonistic relationship with Trump at that point. So she decided to resign, take her luxurious retirement benefits, her $25 million stock portfolio, and go home to Georgia. So that was good in the sense that now the difference between the Democrats and the Republicans in the House are even less than they were. Okay. So trying to avoid the filibuster is the reason that in the Senate we need 60 votes to pass a bill as opposed to 51. It's not a simple majority. We have to have 60 votes to pass a bill. And so apparently that's a rule that the Senate can change. And so Trump has been really trying to get them to change it. And let me just give you an example of why that's really important. It's one of the few powers that the Democrats have, because in order to pass a bill, several Democrats have to vote in favor of the bill with the Republicans. And you're probably aware that they just passed a bunch of budget bills, and then they've only passed the uh, um, Homeland Security funding for 2 weeks because they're using that opportunity to put guardrails on the activities of the ICE agents. Because right now they just do, well, you know what they're doing. They're doing whatever they feel like doing. So they want to add some guardrails to those. So they've got 2 weeks, and we could do that. They could do that because of the fact that it has to have 60 votes, and the Democrats held steady. So Trump's been really, really pressuring John Thune to change that rule, and John said no. There's been a huge pushback, a huge strategic non-cooperation that have given the Democrats just a little tiny bit of power that they have in Congress. So yay, John. And I just want to mention that our totally compliant, ever yes people to Trump, our two senators, voted actually against offshore drilling. They said no, and then they ran in their hole. But I just want to give them credit for the one time they stood up. Okay, next. So I don't know if you heard about this, but there were $2 billion in funding for addictions treatment and mental health centers. $2 billion. They got an email, a phone call, I think an email though, saying no more money after today's your last day. And these people were like going wild because these were people who were suicidal. They were people who were in danger of drug addiction or overdose. I mean, these were really critical high risk services. So they all got on the phone and called their senators and representatives up in Washington and went, no, no, you can't take that money away. This is life and death. These are your constituents. And amazingly enough, a couple days later, they got the money back. So they can act when they want to. Of course, it was all hidden. See, they didn't have to vote. They could call on the phone and tell them what they wanted. Okay, so so now we've got business. Okay, so now all these people have all this money in the stock market. And of course, Trump is trying to get Jay Powell to drop the interest rates. But if you start screwing around with the economy, then the business people get really nervous. And so, when he's saying, oh, you need to drop the interest rates, I'm going to fire you, you're a jerk, you're incompetent. Finally, all the business people in the House and Senate started pushing back again behind the scenes. So they're much more active behind the scenes. And then Tom Tillis, who's usually been pretty quiet up to now, just the last couple of months, is sort of kind of coming out of his shell. And he's like, Greenland? Really? Why would we want, why are we going to invade Greenland? So he's pushing back on that. There was quite a bit of pushback on that. That didn't last too long. And then, of course, now we know that we've always been worried about what was happening with ICE and the other immigrant enforcement, but this thing in Minnesota is just really completely out of control. But it manifests for the world to see, or at least for those of us here who, it seems like the world is watching. So we can see how brutal the regime is and how willing to lie to cover up their activities. That's become very obvious to everybody, even those who won't admit it. So that's pushing back on that. And so then, of course, Alex had a gun. Well, who's all in favor of gun rights, right? So then Alex has got a gun, and then Kash Patel goes, well, he shouldn't have had a gun. He shouldn't have a gun and go to a protest. And it's like, why not? It was perfectly legal to have the gun. So now the National Rifle Association is saying, well, we need to investigate because he had a gun. It was illegal, a gun. He had it legally. I mean, he actually kept it in his holster. He was not brandishing the gun. We could all see that. So this is strange bedfellows, right? That the National Rifle Association is calling for a full investigation by the Trump administration into the murder of Alex. And again, I'll just bring up a couple more issues. So again, of course, we're used to Lisa Murkowski sort of reaching out beyond her confines. But Tom Tillis now the two of them and others are starting to call for the resignation or the impeachment or the firing of Kristi Noem because it was obvious that she just, you know what, you probably know what she did, so I don't even have to say it. And this is a very low bar of success, but in fact, after all the things that ICE and CBP have done, this is the first time that that the administration has ever agreed to an investigation and that they put the two guys that murdered Alex on leave. It's a low bar, but it's a change. It's something that's different that they didn't do in the past. So I think that we are starting to see some of those pillars shifting. Oh, okay. So sorry, I have two more slides on that. So this guy, Chris Mandel, was like, you know, Republican, Midwest, you know, kind of a moderate Republican probably. And he was running for governor. You probably know the governor, ready for reelection in 2026. And he was like, whoa, this is not my Republican Party. He was running as he wanted to be a Republican candidate for governor. And he was like, no, I can't do this. He was just ashamed of the Republican Party. So he dropped out of the race. He specifically said, I cannot possibly represent this Republican Party because this is not what I believe in. And then one of our state senators, Ileana Garcia, started a group called Latinas for Trump. And she's like, no, this isn't what we voted for. When we talked about immigration control, this isn't what we talked about. So thank you for coming. And I know that this is a group that's very progressive. And so I found this resource and I gave, Dottie has the link. So if you want to take a look at some of the information and there are some suggestions and things that you could be thinking about maybe doing. And then I want to talk to you just briefly about where I'm with the Democratic Women's Club of Alachua County, and we want to put together. We're in the process of putting together the Alachua County Resistance Network, and the idea is to send out pro-democracy emails. And I just want to be clear that we don't want your contact information. We want to have one person in your organization that's our contact, and then that person would send out emails to you. So it's sort of a decentralized email network that would potentially include thousands of people so that we could get pro-democracy messages out to a wide group of people, but it's decentralized. Of course, we're Democrats. I mean, we're a Democratic group, I would imagine. My guess would be that many in the room are Democrats, but it won't say Democratic women. It's going to be a completely nonpartisan. The branding will be nonpartisan. The messages will be nonpartisan. We might, you know, remind people that about election dates, but we would never say anything about who to vote for or talk about politics at all. But we would be talking about one of the things we talk about, you know, remind people of protests coming up, letting them know about local protests. And we're talking about boycotts. We haven't really seen much use of boycotts. And so what we've done then is we're starting this up. We've gotten the list of about 12 sort of recommended national boycotts, but we're doing research to see if we agree with their recommendation. And so we'll be, you know, suggesting boycotts if we feel like that's a good reason. And if we do suggest a boycott on a permanent basis, we'll be including some suggestions, you know, for alternate sources for that information, because that's always a boycott problem. Is like, well, then where do I go for this service? We're also going to be talking about boycotts, and boycott is sort of a little bit different idea, but the idea is that you encourage people to participate with vendors or in events that are pro-democracy. So one of the examples is that your group is actually putting on a town hall or a panel discussion or something on ICE in schools. And that would be an example of an event that we consider a pro-democracy event. So if we had your permission, then we would include that and recommend that people you know, go to that, or if there's an LGBT conference or something. So we would just be trying to encourage people to patronize vendors or events that are pro-democracy. And so then obviously we're just sending you an email. It would be like like a plain email. You would be welcome to put your own logo on there. You would be welcome to edit it send it out at a different time. I mean, this would be a completely decentralized network. We're giving you ideas and suggestions, and then you would be free to sort of move those through your system as you felt comfortable with it. Right now our contact is, pretty minimal, but it would give us the basis if we needed to have a rapid response network set up. We would be able to, through the network, ask people if they wanted to volunteer to be rapid response responders. So if we did need people to walk kids to school or bring groceries or things like that, we probably would end up having to add a signal part to that. But anyway, it gives us a lot of opportunity over the next 9 months to try to get people mobilized in a resistance movement that I think Alachua County is well poised to sort of do that sort of thing. So just, I know I'm almost done. It's my last slide. So just remind you that the power of dictatorships comes from the obedience of the people they govern. So if we withhold our consent, then they can't govern us. So.
Do we have any questions? Just raise your hand. We have 10 minutes for questions. Peggy?
Hi, it was really nice to hear that the 2 Florida senators voted against offshore drilling. I heard they also voted against funding ICE. Do you know if that's accurate in this latest go around?
I'll find out. I don't know.
Someone told.
The gentleman says yes.
Yeah, I'm the source for where Peg got that information, and based on something I've it's a CNN report or something like that on my phone. Indeed, they voted for not passing the overall $1.6 billion budget in the shortened version, which would allow the only 2-week funding of ICE, correct, to allow the discussion and in the debate and whatever. By the way, that we are in a short-term government shutdown right now because it's going to last until Tuesday because the House has said they're not going to go and use the fast track method of getting that bill through. So there is a very good possibility that the shutdown will last a little longer. And it's all debate about the ICE funding and whatever and how to go about it.
Thank you for bringing that up. I didn't know that.
We did vote in the way that we approve of. We ought to call them and thank them because we always call them as hell. So let's call them and thank them if they did something right.
Oh, good. I'll send that information to Dr.
Okay, thank you for this presentation. It gives hope. And I hope that it can be posted. Can this whole thing be posted on our site? YouTube? Yay.
It's really big though. I couldn't email it. I mean, you're welcome to it. I'm not.
No, we did a YouTube of your talk. Oh, so once you look great. You look great. And as soon as Colin gets it up, we'll put it in the events, the Tuesday emails. All right.
A couple of days ago on NPR, I heard a scary thing that the democratic countries that have fallen to authoritarianism, if they get their democracy back after 5 years, most crumble and go back to authoritarianism. So that got my attention.
I heard the same thing. So do you understand what she's saying? Is that if you lose it, so I mean, there's still a hopeful presentation, but it makes retaining our democracy even more important, because if we lose it, then chances are good it'll be really hard to get it back on a sustainable basis. So thank you for bringing that up.